Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. In the previous videos, we have talked about the different hadith where the Prophet and the companions of the Prophet and the Imams and Hazrat Zahra have done Azadari for Imam Hussain even before the event of Karbala took place. Today we will talk about an Azadari that took place after the martyrdom of Sayyid al-Shuhada Hamza. After the battle of Uhud, the Prophet came back to Medina and he saw that there is sounds of wailing and crying from the houses of many of the martyrs and the Shuhada of the battle of Uhud, because as you know, and this is a different discussion, but the battle of Uhud, the Muslims gave a lot of Shuhada so that they could win the battle. He saw that there is a lot of wailing and crying coming from the houses in Medina, but there was no crying and there was no wailing from the house of Hamza Sayyid al-Shuhada. The Prophet asked his companions that, are there no ladies to weep and to cry for Hamza? So Sa'ad ibn Ma'az and Usayd bin Hazir and the other Ansar, they told the ladies of their houses to go to the house of Hamza and to cry and weep and do Azadari for Hamza before they do Azadari for their own martyrs. The events that we talked about and the narrations that we talked about in the previous videos, these were before the event of Karbala. But this event now is the Prophet asking the Muslims to cry and to weep and to do Azadari for Hamza who had been martyred in Uhud. So the ladies of Medina, they went to Hazrat Hamza's house and they wept from the nighttime prayers till midnight. And the Messenger of Allah, it is said, awoke and asked what the wailing was. And when he learnt, he talked about the ladies who were crying for Hazrat Hamza. May Allah be pleased with you and may He be pleased with your children. This narration has been recorded in many Islamic books. We will bring up a few references on the screen here. And this shows that the act itself of Azadari. And one other point that we learn from this hadith is that the narrations that we talked about the Prophet and Imam Ali and Hazrat Zahra, maybe we could say that they were family of Imam Hussain. Maybe we could say that it happened before the event of Karbala. But this is exactly this act that the Prophet asked the ladies of the Ansar to do. Is exactly what we are doing 1400 years later. We may not be directly related to Imam Hussain, as the ladies of the Ansar were maybe not directly related, all of them, to Sayyid al-Shuhada Hamza. We came after the event of Karbala. So the crying and the act of keeping alive the memory of someone who has given his life for Islam, the act of crying and weeping and wailing for someone who has been ruthlessly martyred, the act of keeping alive the memory of someone who has fought in the way of Allah is something that the Prophet has asked us to do. The Prophet, who the Quran says is an example for us. The Prophet who we know was sent so that we can emulate him. What he does, we should do. What he says, we obey. So it is the Prophet who has told us that we need to cry for Imam Hussain, we need to weep for Imam Hussain, we need to do Azadari, we need to gather together, we need to remember the martyrs, we need to remember the events of Karbala. So what we are doing is just obeying the commands of the Prophet, as Muslims are supposed to do. We are supposed to obey the commands of Allah, we are supposed to obey the commands of the Prophet. So Azadari, in fact, is a command of the Prophet. Through this hadith, whose references we'll bring up again so that you can refer to them and read the full hadith. One of the issues that is raised against Azadari is that, and of course in the coming videos we'll discuss in more detail, is about the specific act of crying. In my previous video also I mentioned this point. That is why in these videos, one by one, we are discussing the narrations that have reached to us, the authentic narrations, talking about the act itself of weeping and Azadari, of gathering in one place. And inshallah, in the coming days and in the other videos that we will release, we will be discussing other parts of Azadari also. Matam and the julus or the processions that we take and many other aspects of Azadari that we have. So inshallah, I hope that these ahadith that we are discussing at least inspires us to think about the rituals that have reached to us and how important and holy these rituals are. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.